For the first 6 months, Julian was more of a concept than a person. He was the sound of a key in the lock at 7:30 every evening, the quiet thump of work boots on the welcome mat, and the low rumble of the shower running for exactly 8 minutes. He was a ghost who paid his half of the rent on time and left the kitchen cleaner than he found it. I, in turn, was my own kind of phantom. We orbited each other in the small apartment like two celestial bodies held in place by the polite gravity of a Craigslist ad, never colliding, never even really acknowledging the other's atmospheric pull. My life had settled into a kind of quiet, beige stasis. I worked from home, hunched over a laptop, my world shrinking to the size of a screen in the four walls of my bedroom. Loneliness was a low-grade hum I had grown so accustomed to that I barely noticed it anymore, like the buzz of a refrigerator. Then the heating broke. It happened on a Tuesday in the dead of November, the kind of day that felt less like an afternoon and more like a long, drawn-out twilight. The air, which had been comfortably warm, began to thin and sharpen. By evening, a deep, penetrating chill had seeped through the window panes and into the floorboards. It was a cold that felt personal, invasive. My bedroom, situated at the far end of the hall, became an icebox. My fingers were too stiff to type, and I could see my breath fogging in front of my face. The landlord, a man whose primary mode of communication was a shrug, promised someone would be out sometime this week. It was the death knell for my solitary hibernation. The only source of warmth in the entire apartment was a small, ancient space heater in the living room that whirred and glowed with the furious determination of a dying star. It was there, huddled on the couch with a threadbare throw blanket over my legs, that my orbit finally, irrevocably, collided with Julian's. He came home at his usual time, the sound of the key turning in the lock a familiar punctuation marked to the day. But instead of disappearing into his room, he paused in the entryway. I felt his presence before I saw it, a shift in the air, a solidness that absorbed the thin, cold light from the window. He stood there, shrugging off his heavy work jacket. The overhead light caught the dust motes dancing in the frigid air around him. I'd seen him, of course, in passing glances in the hallway or brief, awkward encounters by the fridge. But I had never really watched him. He was taller than I'd catalogued, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his gray Henley. His hair was a dark, unruly mess, and his face, usually set in a neutral, unreadable expression, was softened by the cold, his cheeks flushed. He looked up, and his eyes met mine. They were a deep, quiet brown, and for the first time, they held my gaze for more than a polite, fleeting second. "Cold," he stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low gravel, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the chilled air. I just nodded, pulling the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders. "Heating's out." He didn't say anything else. He just hung his jacket on the hook by the door and walked into the living room. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to sit right next to me, but he chose the worn armchair opposite the couch, angling it toward the glowing orange coils of the space heater. He sank into it with a faint sigh, the old springs groaning in protest. And that's how it began. The silence between us wasn't the empty, avoidant silence of before. It was a shared silence, thick with the whir of the heater and the sound of our breathing. It was the first time we had ever willingly occupied the same space for more than 30 seconds. The beige landscape of my life had just been cracked open by a deep, seismic fault line, and its name was Julian. The days that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm. My work migrated from the icy tundra of my bedroom to the relative tropical zone of the living room couch. I'd set up my laptop on the coffee table, and Julian, when he was home, would occupy the armchair. We rarely spoke, but the space between us filled with the small sounds of cohabitation. The soft click of my keyboard, the rustle of him turning a page in a paperback, the clink of a coffee mug set down on a coaster. I became a scholar of Julian. I learned the way he chewed on his lower lip when he was concentrating, the way his brow furrowed slightly. I learned the scent of him, a clean, subtle mix of sawdust, soap, and something uniquely his, something warm and earthy that I'd catch a trace of when he moved. I watched his hands. They were large, capable hands, with blunt, clean fingernails and a latticework of pale, thin scars across the knuckles. I watched them hold a book, the thumb stroking the edge of the page. I watched them wrap around a mug of tea, the warmth seeping into his skin. I found myself fantasizing about those hands, what they would feel like against my own skin, and a hot, shameful blush would creep up my neck. I would duck my head, pretending to be absorbed in my work, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was an observer, a secret archivist of his every micro-expression, his every quiet gesture. My internal monologue became a relentless, exhausting analysis. He looked up from his book, and his eyes met mine for a second too long. What did that mean? Was it just a glance? Or was there something else in his gaze, something questioning? He got up to refill his water glass, and his knee brushed against mine as he passed the couch. The touch was electric, a spark in the cold air that shot straight up my spine. I replayed the moment 100 times. An accident, surely. The space was cramped. But his leg had lingered for a fraction of a second. Or had it? I was losing my mind, dissecting every mundane interaction for a hidden meaning that was almost certainly a product of my own desperate imagination. I was building a cathedral of hope on a foundation of wishful thinking. One evening, he came back from the kitchen with 2 mugs instead of 1. He wordlessly handed one to me before settling back into his chair. It was chamomile tea, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud. My fingers brushed against his as I took the mug, and the contact was warm and solid. It was a simple, roommate-like gesture, a kindness offered against the cold. But for me, it felt like a seismic event. It was an acknowledgement. I see you sitting there. I know you are cold, too. The warmth of the ceramic mug in my hands was nothing compared to the heat that flooded my chest. Thanks, I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes already back on his book. But I saw it, a faint softening around his mouth, a tiny, fleeting smile that was gone before I could be sure it was ever there. It was enough. It was a crumb, and I was starving. I held that crumb in the palm of my mind for the rest of the night, turning it over and over, examining it from every angle. It sustained me. The landlord remained a frustratingly vague entity. Next week became the new mantra. The cold deepened, settling into the bones of the building. We took to ordering food in, unable to face the prospect of cooking in the frigid kitchen. One night, huddled over pizza boxes on the living room floor, lit by the orange glow of the space heater, something shifted again. We were sitting cross-legged, our shoulders almost touching, the comfortable silence broken by the sound of chewing and the crackle of the cardboard box. "This is ridiculous," I said, mostly to myself, gesturing with a half-eaten slice of pepperoni at the general state of our apartment. Julian finished his bite and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Could be worse," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Could be snowing." As if on cue, a gust of wind rattled the window pane. I looked over and saw the first few flakes of white spiraling down in the lamplight outside. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "You had to say it." He looked at the window, then back at me. And he smiled. A real smile this time, not just a twitch of his lips. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, and it completely transformed his face. It was like the sun breaking through a dense layer of clouds. My breath caught in my throat. In that moment, he wasn't just my stoic, unreadable roommate. He was just a guy, sitting on the floor, eating pizza, smiling because of a stupid joke about the snow. "So," he said, his smile fading back into a more neutral expression, but the warmth of it still lingered in his eyes. "What is it you actually do all day?" "I just hear typing." The question was so simple, so normal, but it felt monumental. He was asking about me. He was curious. My carefully constructed walls of silent observation felt suddenly flimsy. I found myself telling him about my job as a freelance copy editor, about the tedious grammar rules and the satisfaction of finding the perfect word. I talked more than I had in months. And he listened. He didn't interrupt, just watched me, his head tilted slightly, his expression attentive. When I finished, I felt exposed, my cheeks flushed. "It's not very exciting," I added, suddenly self-conscious. "Sounds peaceful," he said, and the way he said it, it didn't sound like a judgment. It sounded like a compliment. He then told me a little about his own job, working for a custom carpentry business. He spoke about the smell of different woods, the precision of a dovetail joint, the satisfaction of creating something solid and useful with his hands. As he talked, I understood the quiet competence he carried himself with. It was in his hands, in his steady gaze. He built things. He made things whole. I, on the other hand, just corrected the mistakes and things other people had made. We fell silent again, but the quality of it had changed once more. It was fuller, warmer. We had shared something, a small piece of ourselves. We were no longer two strangers forced together by a broken furnace, but two people. That night, when I retreated to the couch under my thin blanket, the cold didn't feel quite as sharp. I was still shivering, but there was a new, small ember of warmth glowing inside my chest. It was the memory of his smile. The snow fell relentlessly for 2 days. The city slowed to a crawl, and the landlord's promise of a repairman became a laughable fiction. The apartment grew colder. The space heater fought a valiant but losing battle. By the third night, the chill was profound. I had layered on every sweater I owned and was still shivering violently under my blanket on the couch. Sleep was impossible. Every muscle in my body was clenched against the cold, and my teeth chattered with a will of their own. I must have drifted into a state of shallow, miserable unconsciousness because I was startled awake by a presence beside me. It was 2 a.m. The apartment was pitch black, save for the faint orange pulse of the space heater. Julian was kneeling on the floor next to the couch. In the dim light, I could just make out the dark shape of him, the silhouette of his shoulders. "You're freezing," he whispered. His voice was thick with sleep, a rough, gentle sound in the profound quiet. I couldn't form a reply. My jaw was locked from shivering. I could only manage a shaky nod. He was silent for a moment, and I could hear the soft sound of his breathing. Then he stood up. His shape disappeared from my vision, and I heard his soft footsteps moving down the hall toward his bedroom. A wave of irrational disappointment washed over me. He was just going back to bed. Of course he was. What did I expect? For him to magically fix the heating? To wrap me in his arms? The thought was so absurd, so pathetic, that it brought a fresh wave of shivers. I was alone, and I was cold. It was the story of my life. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself into sleep, to escape the misery of the moment. Then I heard his footsteps returning. They were slower this time, weighed down. I opened my eyes. He was standing beside the couch again, a huge, dark mass in his arms. It was the comforter from his bed. It was a thick, heavy-looking thing, a mountain of fabric. He didn't just hand it to me. He leaned over, and with a surprising gentleness, he unfurled it. The comforter settled over me, a vast, immediate weight. It was like being covered in a warm cloud. The scent of him, that clean, earthy smell of soap and sleep, enveloped me, and for a second, I stopped shivering. The sheer relief of it was dizzying. But he didn't stop there. He didn't step away. Instead, he lifted the edge of the comforter, and in one smooth, quiet motion, he slipped onto the couch beside me. The old springs groaned under our combined weight. He was so close. The length of his body was a line of solid, radiating heat pressed against my back. My mind went completely blank. Every anxious, overanalyzing thought I'd ever had simply evaporated, replaced by a roaring, deafening static of pure sensation. He shifted, pulling the comforter up over his own shoulder, tucking it around us both, creating a small, warm cave in the frozen landscape of the living room. The world outside our blanket ceased to exist. There was only the darkness, the sound of his breathing next to my ear, and the overwhelming, impossible warmth of his body. The shivering started again, but this time it wasn't from the cold. It was from the shock of this proximity, the sheer, terrifying intimacy of it. I am rigid. I am a statue carved from ice, lying next to a furnace. I can feel the heat of him soaking through my layers of clothes, melting me from the outside in. My heart is a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Is this happening? Is this real? My mind struggles to catch up, to process the raw data my senses are screaming at it. Julian. He is here, beside me, under the same blanket. He shifts again, a small adjustment to get more comfortable, and his arm settles over my waist. The weight of it is grounding, a heavy, solid pressure that pins me in place. It's not a romantic gesture, I tell myself frantically. It's practical. It's for warmth. He's just a good roommate, a kind person who didn't want to see me freeze to death. My brain supplies these rational explanations, but my body isn't listening. My body is singing with a current I haven't felt in years, if ever. I lie there for what feels like an eternity, every nerve ending a light. I focus on my breathing, trying to make it even, trying not to betray the absolute chaos churning inside me. I can feel the slow, steady rhythm of his chest rising and falling against my back. It's the calmest, most solid sound in the world, and I try to match my own frantic breaths to it. Inhale, exhale. Then, he moves again. Slowly, deliberately. He turns onto his side, facing me. The arm around my waist tightens, pulling me back against him until my shoulders are pressed into his chest. I can feel the hard planes of his body, the strength in the arm that holds me. His face is so close now that I can feel his breath on the back of my neck, warm and soft. Every rational thought dissolves. This is not practical. This is not just for warmth. My name is a whisper, a rough vibration against my ear. Leo, he's never said my name like that before. So quiet. So close. I can't speak. I can't move. I can only lie there, held by him in the dark, my entire being consumed by a single, terrifying question. What is happening? He nudges my shoulder with his chin, a gentle prompt. I turn. I move as if in a dream, my body acting on an instinct far older and wiser than my panicked mind. I roll onto my back, and then onto my other side, until we are face to face. In the dim, orange glow from the space heater, I can just make out the shape of his face, the dark slash of his eyebrows, the shadow of his nose. His eyes are open, watching me. His hand comes up, the one that was around my waist. It moves with an agonizing slowness. I see it rise, a dark shape against the darker room. His fingers touch my cheek, and the last of my composure shatters. His skin is warm, the tips of his fingers slightly rough with calluses. He traces the line of my jaw, a feather-light touch that sends a tremor through my entire body. I close my eyes. I can't watch. It's too much. His thumb brushes against my lower lip. Once. Twice. It's a question. An invitation. I lean into his touch, a barely perceptible movement, but it's enough. It's my answer. The world shrinks to the space of a single breath. He shifts, closing the last impossible inch between us. And then his mouth is on mine. It's not a hard kiss, not demanding. It's soft. It's hesitant, at first, as if he's testing the water, making sure I won't pull away. It's a kiss that tastes of sleep and warmth and something I can't name. It's honest. My lips part on a hitched breath, and he deepens the kiss. His other hand comes up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me steady. My own hands, which had been trapped uselessly between our bodies, finally find their purpose. I bring them up to his chest, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of his shirt, holding on like he's the only solid thing in a spinning universe. This is real. It's not a dream. It's not a fantasy I cooked up in my lonely head. It's Julian. His mouth on mine, his hands on my skin, his body a solid, warm line against the length of my own. All the unspoken things, all the yearning glances and secret observations, they all coalesce into this one, perfect, terrifying moment. Under the weight of his blanket, in the dead of night, he found me, and I let myself be found. When I woke, it was to the gray light of dawn filtering through the living room window. For a blissful, disoriented second, I was simply warm. Deeply, thoroughly warm. Then memory came rushing back in a tidal wave. The blanket. The couch. Julian. My eyes flew open. I was alone. The couch was empty except for me. The heavy comforter was still covering me, but the space beside me was cold. Julian's armchair was empty. The apartment was utterly silent. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the warm fog of sleep. It was a dream. It had to have been a dream. A vivid, detailed, desperately wanted hallucination brought on by hypothermia and loneliness. The thought was so crushing it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I sat up, the comforter pooling around my waist. The living room was exactly as it had been, just colder now that the space heater had clicked off. There was no sign of him, no evidence that any of it had happened. The silence pressed in on me, mocking my foolishness. Of course it was a dream. I buried my face in my hands, a groan of pure mortification escaping my lips. I had to face him today. I had to see him in the kitchen, in the hallway, and pretend that my subconscious hadn't conjured up the most intimate, soul-shattering dream about him. How could I ever look him in the eye again? My own mind had betrayed me. The sound of the front door opening and closing made me jump so violently I almost fell off the couch. Footsteps. His footsteps. My heart leaped into my throat. I quickly pulled the comforter up to my chin, a pathetic shield, and pretended to be asleep. I heard him move into the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet opening, the clink of mugs, the gurgle of the coffee maker. Normal morning sounds. Sounds that felt completely alien after the silence. He was going to ignore it. That was worse, somehow. He was going to pretend he hadn't come out here, hadn't covered me, hadn't. I couldn't even finish the thought. The shame was too intense. I lay there, rigid with anxiety, listening to him move around the kitchen. This was it. This was the end of our fragile truce. We would go back to being ghosts. Only now my ghost would be haunted by the memory of a kiss that never happened. His footsteps approached the living room. I held my breath, my eyes squeezed shut. He stopped beside the couch. I could feel his presence, just like last night. I waited for him to walk away, to go to his room, to release me from this agonizing limbo. Leo, his voice was quiet, but clear. Not a whisper in the dark this time. A simple statement of my name in the gray morning light. I didn't move. I couldn't. I know you're awake, he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. I brought coffee, the scent of it hit me then, rich and dark. It was my favorite kind. He remembered. That small detail was enough to make my resolve crumble. Slowly, I lowered the comforter and opened my eyes. He was standing there, holding 2 steaming mugs. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was soft, his eyes searching my face. He looked tired, but calm. He didn't look like a man who regretted anything. I pushed myself into a sitting position, my hair a mess, my clothes rumpled. I felt like a wreck. He just stood there, waiting patiently. I took the mug he offered, our fingers brushing for a second time in as many days. The contact was a jolt, a confirmation. It sent a tremor of memory through me. Last night was real. He didn't retreat to his chair. He sat down on the far end of the couch, leaving a careful, deliberate space between us. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes on me over the rim of the mug. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the awkward silence I had dreaded. It was expectant. He was giving me the floor, letting me set the tone. I cleared my throat. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. "For the coffee. And the blanket, you were cold," he said simply, as if that explained everything. As if that explained the kiss that had rewired my entire nervous system. I stared down into my mug, watching the steam curl and dissipate. I needed to know. I had to ask, even if the answer shattered me. "Julian," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Last night," he set his mug down on the coffee table with a soft click. He turned his body to face me fully. "Leo," he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through my anxiety. "Look at me." I forced myself to lift my head. His gaze was direct, unwavering. There was no pity in it, no regret. There was just a quiet intensity that held me pinned. "I'm not sorry about last night," he said. Each word was clear, deliberate. "Are you?" Relief washed over me so powerfully I felt lightheaded. It was a physical sensation, like a muscle I'd been clenching for my entire life had finally released. I shook my head, unable to speak. A slow smile spread across his face. The same one from the other night, the one that made his eyes crinkle. "Good," he said. Later that day, a miracle occurred. A squat man with a toolbox and a permanent scowl showed up, and, after an hour of clanging and cursing in the basement, restored our heat. The radiators hissed and ticked back to life, and a wave of glorious, artificial warmth began to spread through the apartment. The crisis was over. The thing that had forced us into the same small circle of light was gone. The test had arrived. With the return of warmth, we could return to our separate corners. We could retreat into our own rooms and let the space between us grow cold again. The thought filled me with a familiar, hollow dread. All afternoon, I stayed on the couch, wrapped in his comforter long after I needed it, as if it could somehow tether him to me. He went to his room, and the silence that descended felt different. It felt like a choice. I spent hours replaying our morning conversation, clinging to his words. "I'm not sorry." But what did that mean for now? For tomorrow? As evening fell, the apartment was warm and bright. It should have felt comfortable, but it felt vast and empty. I finally retreated to my own room, the air now blessedly temperate. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss was a moment of strange, cold-induced intimacy, and the morning was just him being kind, letting me down easy. We were back to being roommates. The thought was unbearable. I heard his bedroom door open. I heard his footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath. Was he just walking past? Was he going to the kitchen? A soft knock. Once. Twice. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked to the door. I pulled it open. He was standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. He looked uncertain for the first time since I'd met him. "Hey," he said. "Hey." I replied, my voice a croak. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at me. His eyes roamed my face as if he were trying to read something there. Finally, he spoke, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "My room's still warmer," he said. It wasn't a statement about temperature. It was an invitation. It was a choice. It was everything. A real, genuine smile broke across my face. I felt it stretch my cheeks, a feeling so unfamiliar and so welcome. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside, holding the door open for him. But he didn't come in. He just shook his head slightly and held out his hand. I looked at his hand, at the calloused fingers and the pale scars across his knuckles. The hand that had traced my jaw in the dark. I looked back up at his face, at the quiet hope in his eyes. And without a second of hesitation, I put my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and firm. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze and led me out of my room, down the hall, and into his. His room was simple, neat. It smelled like him. He led me to his bed, and we sat on the edge, our hands still linked between us. We didn't kiss. We just sat there, in the quiet, warm room, letting the reality of this new beginning settle around us. The frantic energy, the desperate yearning, the sharp anxiety, it all seemed to meld away, leaving behind something calm and steady. I looked around his room, at the stacks of books on his nightstand, the framed photo of a mountain range on his wall. I had spent so much time observing him from a distance, trying to piece together the man from the smallest of clues. Now I was here. I was a part of his space. I leaned my head against his shoulder. He responded by wrapping his arm around me, pulling me close. It felt different from last night on the couch. There was no desperation, no shivering cold. There was just comfort, a deep, quiet sense of rightness. For months, this apartment had just been a place I lived, a collection of rooms where I felt mostly invisible. But now, sitting here, with Julian's arm around me and the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me, I realized something. I wasn't just a ghost in these rooms anymore. I was finally, wonderfully home.